Joshua Daydone. I work, one of my duties is in the makerspace, is a self-directed tech workshop. We're closing in on our 10th anniversary pretty soon, of providing access to various pieces of technology that the home consumer wouldn't otherwise probably have. 3D printers, laser cutters, you can come and learn to use a sewing machine, solder electronics, start with a vision of a project, and with our facilitation help make that a reality, or at least learn along the way what you'll need to do. It's really been a privilege to work with the Open Air Artists. It's a super cool program. I love that we are able to provide a place for people from our community and from outside of our community to come and create art. I think it's a really important thing for all the people who can come and visit. And just watching the engagement, the inventiveness, the just outside of the box thinking and upcycling and reusing, this all things that we try to embody in makerspace. It's just, yeah, a very cool program that we have here. And next, I think Kelly is going to introduce our artists. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Joshua. Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Sinner. I'm the program coordinator for Open Air. I'm going to introduce Justine formally. So, Justine Lai is an artist working in painting and experimental animation. She's originally from Sacramento, California, and is currently based in Queens, New York. She received a BA in English and Studio Art from Stanford University and an MFA in painting from the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Bloom Hills, Michigan. Her work has been exhibited at Asian Arts Initiative in Philadelphia, Gawker Media in New York, and is currently in an exhibit opening tomorrow, which is so exciting, at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, California. So everybody, welcome Justine.
Check the battery level on my laptop. Okay. I'd like to extend my gratitude to Open Air and the Missoula Public Library. It's such an honor to be here sharing with you all. Thank you, Stony and Kelly, and as well as my fellow artists in residence, BT, Shelby, and Michelle. And then, of course, a huge thank you to Taylor and Joshua at the Makerspace, as well as the amazing staff and volunteers here. I thought I would start out with some background about my work and process, then screen a couple animation examples, and then talk about what I've been working on while I'm here and why it's been a truly unique experience. My recent work is what's called direct animation or cameraless animation. It's made not by shooting film or photographing animation cells in sequence, but by painting, scratching, collaging, and bleaching directly onto strips of movie film. But this is really part of a broader and interdisciplinary practice. I typically call myself an artist rather than an animator or a filmmaker. And my background is in painting, which is my focus for both undergrad and graduate school. And I still make paintings and think like a painter. And for the past 10 years, I've worked primarily in ink, watercolor, and dye on fabric. So I'd like to start with those. This is an older painting called What the Lobster Saw. I was thinking about looking up from a pot of boiling water, but also the feeling of like steam and heat on the face when you're the one doing the lifting. So even before I had ever thought about animation, I had this interest in a cinematic language of seeing and being seen, and what it means to feel seen. And how one's perspective can be visually or compositionally cued and conjured, spying through a peephole, a zoom shot through binoculars. And I was looking at a lot of German expressionism, not just painting, but also film. There's an Ernst Lubitsch film called The Wildcat, silent film, which has such a shocking variety of these compositions and frame mats. There can be such a strangeness and innovation to silent film that has always felt very vital and compelling to me. So compositionally, I was making these huddles and perspective shots in my paintings. You know, I was another huddle and another huddle. I was painting this, oops, did my mic go out? I was painting this so much that I began making little parodies of myself. You know, this is gazing up from the toilet bowl. It's kind of part tide pooling and part Narcissus looking at his own reflection. There's another one. But around this time, I was beginning to feel stuck. I think the reality of being an artist and an emerging artist in New York City, a struggling artist, was getting to me, to be honest. I was working in tech full-time to pay apartment rent and studio rent. And I was so, I was so enriched by everything that New York City had to offer. But I wasn't quite finding a community or a career. There's so much ambition and talent in New York City. Thank you. But I guess that also means that, you know, sometimes people aren't up for, you know, vulnerability about time and money and those types of difficulties and challenges. And, you know, when you're a painter, paintings take up space. You need like storage. So for like so many reasons, I was looking for a way to shake things up in my studio, my art practice. I signed up for an experimental direct animation workshop at Mono no Aware, which is a cinema arts nonprofit in Brooklyn, New York, which I now occasionally teach workshops at. I think I was thinking, oh, you know, drawing and painting on film. I know these materials, inks, drawing tools. I know and love how these behave, how they dry down. I have muscle memory about how it feels to use them. Except now they're on like a teeny tiny scale, 16 millimeters wide. And there's no use being a perfectionist about this type of drawing and painting because, you know, they go by so quickly when they're projected. It's 24 frames per second. I always say that my animations are comedies because they're so absurdly short, despite all the time and effort that goes into them. Like, I'll just like instinctively laugh when they're over so soon, when I replay them. So in that sense, they're kind of a tragicomic. But there was something in that workshop and subsequently, something so freeing about that process and being a total beginner and being in that Zen mind, beginner's mind kind of space. You know, I'm aware that people spend their entire careers studying animation. Down in the makerspace, we have, you know, teenage visitors who know more about certain types of stop motion animation and current animation software than maybe I ever will. It's a discipline full of notions about craft and skill and mastery and expertise. And I respect that path. But then I'll just like, you know, make a mark, you know, blep on screen that when you project it will just flutter around kind of almost uncontrollably. One thing I've realized about myself is that I make art to discover what rules I'm subconsciously following and carrying with me. And then I try to see what happens when I break those discovered rules. So something about this process really unlocked something for me. It was accessible and it removed a lot of the preciousness that I was showing up to the studio with. It both slowed down and sped up the act of painting, and it was satisfyingly tactile. Like to join two shots, you're like literally guillotining film strips and then splicing them together with tape. So when you draw and paint on movie film, you can either work on a plain plastic base called film leader, which is perforated just like film, and it's used to initially thread the machine. Or you can draw and paint on actual camera or print stock. So this would be that plastic base with a photographic emulsion on it, actual imagery. And then in that case, it becomes a kind of found footage appropriation and commentary. This is an excerpt from a 2019 piece called End Credits, guilty by reason of race. It uses found footage. In this case, a reel from eBay, a black and white film that's faded to magenta, if you can make it out in the background, of a 1972 NBC documentary about the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, which is a part of my family history and a recurring theme of my work. In this case, direct animation became something quite cathartic about difficult and traumatic subject matter. In spite of there being like a delayed gratification between the act of making it, frame by frame, and the act of projecting it and actually seeing what it looks like, and sustaining feelings of confusion, maybe even rage over 24 little frames per second. There's something about that juggle that became part of my process. And also dealing with this found footage, you know, there was a contradiction between valuing my source material. It's not like I could just go back to the, you know, Japanese incarceration film footage store and get more if I messed up. Something between like valuing this kind of scarce material and then also like scratching it up and destroying it. Maybe because I'm a collector / hoarder at heart, or because I was looking on eBay for movie film stock, or because the types of tools in this analog filmmaking are so specialized and obscure. But I began incorporating the materiality of this direct animation process into my work. So let's see. Oops. These are some paintings of my projector, which is actually in the corner. Another projector painting, again, this is all ink, watercolor on fabric. In other words, the same materials I used to make direct animation, but back on fabric. Another kind of portrait of my projector. And I was also incorporating found objects, such as plastic bags. This is a painting. It's hard to tell from the photograph, but it's actually just kind of stuffed with plastic bags. You know how every household in the kitchen ends up with a plastic bag full of plastic bags. This is, I was thinking about this as like a painting that could also fill that role. And it's like a 16mm frame strip. And then I started using, for a while I was using Elliott Gould movie posters and animation cells. And again, in the spirit of having, you know, thinking about the sort of perceived value and scarcity of my materials, it was like destroying cells or melting them with acetone. This one is called Cell Gore. But since we're here in person, I'd like to show you a couple of animations on the projector. As I mentioned, they'll be short. And if the projector behaves, I'll maybe try to play them twice. We'll see. So these are sequences from the 1990s anime Sailor Moon, the transformation sequences, where the heroine's hold up their magical pens and get in a costume. These sequences get replayed every episode to save on costs. And what I've made are handmade versions on clear leader. The first one using a laser printer on that clear leader and coloring it in, which I call my adult coloring. And then adding nail polish and glitter glue and confetti. And the second one is Sailor Mercury, technically, and that one is done by the process of rotoscoping or tracing. Like a lot of children, I grew up drawing characters from Disney movies and anime and manga. I learned to draw, period, because of copying these things. And for a bit, I thought I wanted to be an animator or an Imagineer, who are the people who design Disneyland and Disney attractions. But I think now, as an adult, I know that the object of my obsession, the thing that felt so free and easy and full of life, these cartoons, was the result of hundreds or even thousands of people's work, difficult work. And I'm really interested in that history, the history of animation, including the Disney animators' strike in 1941. It's something I reflect on a lot as an artist, as a cultural worker, especially in this era of creative economy, creator economy, where that demands content. So there's this question of what do people actually dream of when they dream of becoming an artist or an animator? You're just one person and you love to draw, but the more professional you get, the less you get to do everything. And doing things as a career can distance you from the joy of making. And it's such luck and privilege, and not just hard work and merit, to find any success at it. And so making these animations is about confronting these types of feelings, the limits of what just one person can do. And a huge aspect of that is enabled by technology, which brings me to my time here. During my time here at the Makerspace, I've worked mostly with the CO2 laser cutter, creating highly detailed stencils and blue tape masks for building up layers of color. Here's an example of some of the blue tape stickers I use, and then the resulting film on the right. I used a Taco Bell sauce packet for scale because I had it on hand, but you get a sense of how fine the laser can get when it comes to cutting out these shapes that I've created. For many people using the laser in the Makerspace, the blue painter's tape is actually disposable. It's used to protect wooden acrylic surfaces from getting scorch marks. But here it's my focus. And I've loved how it's helped me iterate on ideas. Like, I'll get to say cut and do different takes. Like the one on the left didn't turn out quite how I wanted it, so I was able to, carve up a new set of masks and do the one on the right. And here's another example. This time I found a penny for scale, more of that Sharpie marker work. I'm also exploring the engraving feature to etch into film, which really, I'm going to go ahead and a slide. Here we go. I'm exploring the engraving feature of the laser cutter to etch into film, which really expands the possibilities in mark making. The line sections right here were accomplished with lasering directly into the emulsion, and it creates this kind of boiled look when it's projected. And the precise registration of the laser when it carves into things means that not only the mark, but the movement, the motion has a completely different feeling that stands in contrast to whatever I'm doing by hand. And the laser also allows other materials to be cut into 16mm strips that won't upset a projector. So on the left, this is 35mm film that, it's a movie trailer that I got on eBay, and that has been cut down into 16mm, and then on the bottom, subsequently bleached out and drawn on. Yeah, I think I'll actually show some examples of work in progress. In New York, I teach workshops on a traditional Oxbury animation stand, which is this hulking, room size, maybe like 650-pound machine with a downward-facing film camera where you put animation cells under a hinged piece of glass, and you use like a motor to crane up and down, and you can roll a crank to move the table left and right. I mean, you're doing this frame by frame, you know, move, shoot, move, shoot. I found that while I was working here, that setting up the laser and like looking down on the surface, working on the precise registration of where the laser would hit into my film or tape, you know, it reminded me of using the Oxbury. And like the animation stand, you know, the actual machine itself is fast within seconds. But it's all the complicated setup that is really what counts, like in a very measure twice, cut once kind of way. And then to give context to the camera I'm talking about, here's some Walt Disney Animation Studios multi-plane camera operators to give a sense of scale and body for some of these processes. You know, motion pictures, well now synonymous with, you know, entertainment, popular entertainment. You know, movies have also always been a business venture. Movie studios in early Hollywood were some of the original startups. And I say this to put animation in context as a way of understanding creative labor and technical innovation. Animation and cinema history has always been about people using technology. For example, the invention of transparent animation cells instead of photographing tens of thousands of just drawings on paper. Or early computer graphics, those were animations created at places like Bell Labs. So my time here in the makerspace feels very relevant within a tradition of working and experimenting. While I'm here in residence, I've also been using the 3D printer to print somewhat obscure 16 millimeter projector and camera parts and tools. There's a wonderful effort to make these free and open source. A friend of mine runs at 16mm.com, which is pictured below. And while here in the makerspace, I'm working on it's like a custom ruler or film holder with registration pegs, which were that can be used on top of a light box. In other words, a tool that's just for me, to my own design, to assist in hand-drawn animation. And I've really enjoyed having the opportunity, not only using the makerspace to make art directly, but to create things that would assist in the process. And there is a tradition of experimental and avant-garde film artists who actually kind of MacGyver their own sophisticated tools and techniques. For example, here's Normick McLaren working on a 35mm direct animation on this custom light table that uses like a custom prism to shine up the previous frame onto the next one where he's working. He actually authored the pamphlet, How to Make Animated Movies Without a Camera, which kind of, here's the first page of it. It shows how to build like a simple version of this table. So much in the spirit of 16mm.com, there is a real workshop-based teaching effort around some of these technologies instead of something being gate-kept. And here is a studio shot of John and James Whitney. John Whitney worked at Lockheed Aircraft Factory and started collecting, quote, mechanical junk in the 1950s. And they actually used computerized targeting elements in military anti-aircraft equipment to create these beautiful graphics, spirals and mandalas. We often talk about a paradigm where artists are early adopters of and evangelists of the latest cutting-edge technology. For example, the latest in AI and generative work. But I also think it's the role of artists to look backwards, to challenge the notion of what kind of technology is useful or obsolete or relevant. and to creatively repurpose and reuse, and to see treasure and potential across different scales of time. And I think that's why my practice ultimately involves both analog and digital technologies. Ultimately, I make art because I want to reflect on what it means for things and for people to have value. It's been an honor to be in residence here and to be given this opportunity for experimentation, so thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions for Justine?
Did we see the film that will be in San Francisco? Was it the first one?
In San Francisco, it'll be a digital projection of The Guilty by Reason of Race, directed by me.
Cool.
Justine, can you talk, I really enjoyed a studio visit with you just recently, and you talked a lot about process. Can you unpack that a little bit for folks? I know you have like an example maybe up on the table, but can you help fill out in our minds like what it looks like for you to go from a blank leader film to a 15-second clip? Like, what does that entail?
I think it's different if you're working from found footage and have something to base it off of versus coming up with completely abstract Stan Brakhage-like flashes and visions. In this case, because I'm like appropriating imagery from anime, I actually convert a digital file using FFmpeg into a series of strips that I'm subsequently able to rotoscope on top of a light table. So that clear leader becomes the mechanism for tracing and drawing images of existing video.
Can you unpack FFmpeg?
FFmpeg is like a command line tool done for working with graphics and video. Yeah.
I'm curious about, thinking of you as like starting out as a painter and now doing this film work. And I'm curious if you could talk about the relationship now with sort of like machinery plays in your work versus being a painter when it's sort of you on a brush.
Mm-hmm. More things can go wrong with machinery. I don't know though. I'm using machinery and like. I guess I've always been a tinkerer, and that particular itch isn't necessarily scratched by a brush and pen, but the process of problem solving and working on things that happens in a painting and now is kind of expanded out. It affects the tools I use. So, my projector is silent because the sound is broken, and I was actually showing you 18 frames per second because that's the silent mode and that kind of thing. Like, more things can go wrong, but there's a lot of like discovery there and room for problem solving and finding new opportunity.
So if you look forward 3 years from now, will you follow what you do and see where it takes you, or do you have thoughts as where you want to be with your work?
That's a great question.
I can come up with a different one.
I think I work very intuitively, and a large part of my process is historical research. For example, while I'm here in Missoula, I've been trying to spend time at Fort Missoula looking through some of the historical photographs of Japanese American incarcerees there. So in that sense, I don't always know what medium I'm going to be using because I'm so concept and project based. So I guess I'm saying the research will take me there. I have these topics that are interesting, and I think I like working in painting, but it's can't be sure.
Good answer.
Hi. How many frames did you draw on in the short films that you showed?
I don't actually know.
I was trying to
Yeah.
count. How long is each one of the films you showed?
They're under 2 minutes.
Okay, so if it's 24 frames per second,
And these were projected at 18, so, you know, there'll be some math involved.
so it's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. But, you know, you're working at this scale where one mark can take up, you know, many seconds if you're okay with it. I was really pleased to be able to offer a workshop here at the library on this particular technique. I mean, it's one of those things that's easy to learn and difficult to kind of master. And I think it had everyone thinking about time in a different way. If you need a ball to move across the screen, you'll need, you know, at least 24 little circles going at a diagonal. If you want text to be legible, you'll need to redraw it, re-scratch it at least 12 frames in order for people to be able to read it. Otherwise, it'll go by in an instant. So there is a certain amount of spatial time, thinking about imagery in time and space and differently.
I kind of think out loud as I ask this question. It strikes me that the animation is more like directly expressive of emotion, and I felt the first film, especially like I picked up on rage with the faces and the emotion that in your painting, like the stillness, it's such a different experience, sort of. And I'm thinking about the perspective thing of like looking at puddles of people and like how do those two forms of making like, do you think that some of your ideas are better in one medium and some are better in the other, or is that a conscious decision?
I think it's exploring, you know, it's exploring contrast. Like I pointed out, I'm using the same inks, the same markers on painting and film. But, you know, when you're talking about fabric or paper, you know, watercolor really absorbs into that substrate and it soaks into it. Versus on film, you know, it's plastic. There's elements of layering and sitting on top of. And I haven't really thought this idea out entirely, but you know, when I talk about something like tide pooling, you're looking deep into the water and you're looking for those little sparks of something that will catch your attention. But you're also at the ocean and it's very reflective. Like there's that push and pull of what you're actually kind of looking at. And that to me is kind of about, you know, the act of making art, whether it's about your world, but also your internal world.
How about the use of your work is you find the topic and you kind of follow the lead there, and I find it such a contrast of the topics of the internment camps versus Sailor Moon. Is there some sort of like relationship, like some sort of network of space between those two that you're working to find a relationship between? Is there a relationship in there for you, or are they kind of different threads that pique your interest?
I think they're threads that get woven into how identity is constructed. And when you're dealing with, you know, whether you're dealing with a 90s piece of media or, you know, a history that's, you know, many, many decades ago, you're also thinking about remembrance and looking back and how memory is constructed. I think I mentioned I'm a collector, and a large part of, you know, the materiality in my work or the use of objects has to do with, you know, how objects and memories can become, you know, physical or made tangible. What's kept in archives, what's saved, you know, how we choose to remember things versus what, you know, gets thrown away or succumbs to, you know, online link rot and that kind of thing. So it may not seem like there's a connection at first, but I think there is kind of a emotional or referential connection. Okay.